picture a map, right? Just, a vast, sprawling country. Now take a marker and draw a tiny circle around just a sliver of that land.
Like a really, really small dot.
Exactly, a dot. If you're looking at the sheer physical space, you might just overlook it entirely.
Oh, for sure.
But imagine if that tiny dot, that microscopic sliver of geography, somehow held half of an entire nation's massive retail infrastructure. I mean, it defies physics, right? It's like a black hole of commerce.
It really does feel like a spatial impossibility.
Oh.
I mean, we are so accustomed to infrastructure spreading out evenly, as land mass increases. We expect a natural proportional distribution.
Right, like things should just make geographical sense.
Exactly. But today, we're jumping into a data set about South Africa's shopping malls that proves this spatial paradox is actually happening right now. Our goal with this deep dive is to explore this extreme geographic concentration and really unpack what is actually happening inside these spaces.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we really have to start with the sheer scale of the anomaly here. When I first looked at this source material, I was trying to reconcile the physical math of it.
Yeah, the numbers are jarring.
They really are. We are talking about one specific province here, Gauteng, and the data set explicitly notes that Gauteng takes up just 1.5% of South Africa's total land area.
Right, 1.5%. It is an incredibly restricted physical footprint. To put that into perspective, if you were to lay out a grid of the entire country, Gauteng barely registers. It's just a fractional square.
Yeah, 1.5% is basically a rounding error in continental geography. And here is the statistic that forces you to just completely rethink how space works. Packed into that tiny, almost negligible footprint are 1,509 shopping malls.
Which is just staggering. I mean, it fundamentally alters our understanding of urban development. When you look at a concentration like that, you are no longer talking about a city that, happens to have some retail centers scattered around.
Right. It's not just a neighborhood with a grocery store. To me, it's less like a traditional city and more like a computer motherboard.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, because if you think about traditional urban planning, the city is the motherboard, right? And the retail spaces are just little chips plugged into it. But when you have over 1,500 malls crammed into 1.5% of the landmass, the architecture totally flips.
The retail becomes the motherboard.
Exactly. The retail is the motherboard. The malls are the central processors, and the highways, the roads, the residential zones are just the circuitry connecting you to the next commercial hub.
I love that analogy. It is a highly accurate way to visualize it. The physical landscape of Gauteng is fundamentally defined by retail architecture. The topography itself becomes commerce.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, to fit that many substantial structures into that tight of a space, it means developers aren't just building malls to serve a pre-existing community.
Yeah.
The community is often structured around, or even secondary to, the retail environment.
It changes everything about living there.
It really does change the structural reality of the province. Every daily commute, every social outing, the logistical supply chains, they're all tethered to this incredibly dense network of commercial hubs.
You are practically just navigating from mall to mall.
Very much, yeah.
But, analyzing Gauteng in isolation kind of only tells half the story. To truly grasp the magnitude of this footprint, we have to zoom out and look at the rest of the country.
Right, because context is the only way to measure an outlier.
Right.
So nationwide, our sources indicate that South Africa has over 3,000 malls in total.
Okay, let's just hold on that figure for a second and weigh it against what we just said. Over 3,000 malls nationwide, and Gauteng, that tiny 1.5% sliver, holds 1,509 of them.
Yes.
So it is literally hoarding roughly half of the nation's entire retail infrastructure in a single dot on the map. It's like packing half the weight of a freight train into a single suitcase.
The centralization is absolute. It really is.
Right.
And the data set provides this provincial breakdown that illustrates how steep the drop-off really is outside of Gauteng.
Yeah, let's go through that because it's wild.
Let's look at it in tiers, because reading it as a flat list just doesn't capture the lived experience of this disparity.
Yeah.
So Gauteng is obviously in a tier of its own at the top. But then you look at the second tier. The province with the second highest number is KwaZulu-Natal.
Okay, and they have how many?
365.
Wait, I need to pause you there. Second place is 365.
Yeah.
Because when I saw KwaZulu-Natal at number 2 in the data, I expected a close runner-up. I was thinking, I don't know, maybe 1,000 malls. or even 800.
Like a normal curve.
Exactly. But you go from first place at 1,509 down to 365. That is not a gentle decline. That is a statistical freefall.
It's a massive deceleration, absolutely. And it doesn't recover. So the Western Cape is right there in that same tier with 331. Then we step down into this sort of middle tier where the numbers steadily compress. You have the Eastern Cape at 227, Mpumalanga at 201, and the Northwest at 181.
So we're seeing this kind of clustering around the 200 mark for a large portion of the country.
Precisely. And then it drops again. The Free State has 132, and Limpopo sits at 93.
Wow. Under 100 now.
Yeah. And finally, at the absolute bottom of the distribution, we hit the Northern Cape, which has just 22 malls.
Just 22.
22.
I mean, from 1,509 all the way down to 22. Looking at this extreme disparity, I have to push back a little here, or at least ask the question, is Gauteng actively pulling all the commercial development away from the rest of the country, or are these other provinces simply experiencing a completely different reality?
Well, it's likely a combination of a few things. Agglomeration is a big factor. That's where businesses cluster together to reduce costs and, increase foot traffic. But it's also the reality that different geographic scales just require different economic models.
Right, that makes sense.
But you hit on the most important point there. The infrastructure dictates the reality. The mathematical weight of this data set proves that the experience of daily life is profoundly different depending on which side of that provincial line you stand on.
Yeah, just think about the mechanics of gathering. If you live in the Northern Cape, a shopping mall is this rare, specific destination.
Oh, definitely.
With only 22 of them across an entire massive region, going to the mall isn't just where you casually pop in for a coffee on your lunch break.
No, it's an expedition.
Exactly, it's an event. But if you live in Gauteng, malls are just the very fabric of your surroundings. They are ubiquitous. They are the backdrop to your Tuesday afternoon.
And that ubiquity creates a really unique challenge for the developers in Gauteng. If you have roughly half of the country's malls packed into your immediate vicinity, you are facing relentless, hyper-dense competition.
Oh, I hadn't even thought about the competition aspect.
Yeah, a mall in that environment simply cannot survive by just being a place that sells goods. To justify that kind of density and still attract foot traffic, the architecture has to evolve.
Which means they can't just be standard strip malls anymore. They have to become something much larger, something that can capture and really hold people's attention.
Exactly. And the data set gives us a perfect example of this evolution. Fourways Mall. It's located right inside that dense hub of Gauteng.
Yeah, Fourways Mall. The scale of this facility is just staggering. The text describes it as a space of, quote, pure retail wonder. And it clocks in at 178,000 square meters.
Which is massive.
It is. I was trying to conceptualize that footprint for the listener. 178,000 square meters is roughly the size of 33 American football fields.
Wow. Yeah, that really puts it into perspective.
Right. Calling it a shopping center feels entirely inadequate. Conceptually, it is an enclosed micro-city.
That is the exact right term for it, a micro-city. To operate a structure of that magnitude, it requires urban-level infrastructure. You aren't just managing retail tenants anymore.
What else are they managing?
You're managing complex microclimates through massive HVAC systems. You are orchestrating foot traffic flow that, quite frankly, rivals a major airport terminal. You have security grids, waste management systems, logistical supply chains, all operating under one continuous roof.
That's insane. The engineering required just to turn the lights on every morning is a monumental feat.
It really is.
And the psychology of a space that large is fascinating to me, too. When you are inside a structure that spans 33 football fields, and it's entirely climate-controlled and artificially lit, you sort of lose track of the outside world.
You do. It creates a physical and mental vacuum.
Yes, a vacuum. And what I find most compelling in the data is how the mall chooses to fill that vacuum, because it's not what you might expect.
Right. The sources reveal that the interior of these spaces isn't just this endless cavern of generic retail. The offerings are actually highly curated, and there's a very deliberate friction in what they provide.
What do you mean by friction?
Well, on one hand, the text highlights a distinct layer of premium white glove luxury. They specifically mentioned exclusive services like VIP lounges and personal styling sessions.
Which makes sense mechanically. VIP lounges give you this manufactured sense of exclusivity, right? It's a way to separate yourself from the massive crowds navigating this microcity.
Exactly.
And personal styling elevates the transaction. You aren't just buying a shirt, you are paying for an expert to curate an identity for you. It is a highly sanitized, globalized version of commerce.
But, and this is where it gets really interesting, the narrative in the dataset doesn't stop at that globalized luxury. In fact, it specifically contrasts those VIP services with elements that are deeply rooted in the local landscape.
Right, the local culture.
Yes, alongside the personal styling, the malls are offering beautifully wrapped local crafts and gifts that carry legends of South Africa's vibrant culture. The text even explicitly mentions the inclusion of, and this is a quote, tall stories.
Tall stories. I kept returning to that phrase in the notes. It is such a specific, almost poetic detail to find in a data set about retail square footage.
It really is.
You have the sterile, high-end VIP lounge on one side of the concourse, and then right next to it, you have the passing down of local legends and vibrant cultural narratives. How do those two extremes even coexist without one consuming the other?
Well, it requires a deeply localized approach to commercial architecture. By intentionally integrating things like local crafts and the vibrant culture's tall stories, the developers are attempting to solve the problem of that microcity vacuum we discussed earlier.
Okay, so it's a retention strategy.
Exactly. If a mall of that size feels too generic, people will eventually leave. They'll get bored or overwhelmed. To keep them inside, the mall has to absorb the culture outside its doors. It packages it, beautifully wraps it, and offers it back to the millions of people who walk through those corridors.
It is a brilliant, if slightly surreal juxtaposition, because when we think of a typical mega mall, we usually think of homogenization.
Oh, absolutely. The same chain stores, the same food courts.
Right, the same predictable layout, basically erasing whatever local flavor existed before the concrete was poured. But here, the sources are telling us that the very identity of South Africa, its legends, its tall stories, is actively being utilized as an anchor tenant.
It completely reframes how we view the function of these structures. They aren't just transactional spaces where people go strictly to exchange currency for goods anymore.
No, they're becoming something else entirely.
They are acting as active cultural hubs. It is a deliberate intersection where modern VIP exclusivity is forced to share a roof with traditional storytelling and local heritage. The mall literally becomes a curator of the national identity.
Wow. And when you map that curation back onto the geographic paradox we started with, I mean, the implications are just massive.
They really are.
If you have a 178,000 square meter microcity like Fourways Mall acting as a cultural hub, and you have over 1,500 of these massive structures packed into just 1.5% of the country's landmass, the sheer volume of cultural exchange happening inside these retail environments is staggering.
It changes our fundamental understanding of what a shopping mall is engineered to do within a modern society. It is no longer just a byproduct of the economy. It is the arena where the culture itself is being negotiated and sustained.
Okay, let's take a step back and look at the complete picture of what we've mapped out today for you. We started by examining an intense geographic anomaly, that tiny 1.5% sliver of land in Gauteng that somehow serves as the motherboard for 1,509 shopping malls.
Which is still just hard to wrap my head around.
I know, right? And then we explored the mathematical weight of that density, contrasting it with the steep free-fall drop-off across the rest of the nation, all the way down to just 22 malls in the Northern Cape.
Yeah, from a completely saturated landscape to a virtual retail desert.
Exactly. And finally, we looked at the structural evolution required to survive in that kind of density. We stepped inside the massive microcity of Fourways Mall, exploring how it manages the friction between VIP exclusivity and the vibrant, tall stories of local legends.
And looking at all of this together, it leaves us with a really provocative question that's embedded right in the heart of this data.
What's that?
Well, if a staggering 1,509 malls are packed into just 1.5% of the country, and these enclosed, hyper-managed spaces are filled not just with commerce, but with the curated tall stories and vibrant legends of the local heritage, are these massive retail structures actually replacing the traditional public square?
Oh, wow.
Right. As the physical footprint of commerce expands, are malls becoming the primary designated spaces where a society's culture is preserved, gathered around, and shared.
That is the ultimate tension, isn't it? If all the local legends are being told inside the retail wonder, what happens to the spaces outside? We want you to take that idea with you. Look around the physical spaces in your own life. Where are the stories in your community actually being told? And how is the architecture of your daily routine shaping your reality? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the spaces around you. And remember, sometimes the heaviest, most complex systems are found squeezed into the tiniest slivers of the map. Take care, everyone.